My name is Elena, and I'm 44 years old. The day my daughter brought home her fiancé, I thought my heart would burst with joy. I remember standing in the kitchen that morning, nervously tasting the stew I had been cooking for hours. It wasn't just any dinner, it was the dinner where I would meet the man who had stolen my daughter's heart. The smell of roasted garlic filled the house, and for a moment, I felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety. Sophia had always been my everything. Since her father left when she was 10, it had been just the two of us against the world. I worked 2 jobs, sacrificed weekends, and gave up dating entirely so I could focus on raising her right. And when she finally told me she had met someone special, someone she wanted to spend her life with, I was happy for her, truly. She told me his name was Diego. According to her, he was polite, well-educated, from a respected family, and had a great sense of humor. I could tell by the way she talked about him that she was completely in love. As a mother, all I wanted was for her to be cherished and treated with respect. I tried not to let my worries show, but a part of me couldn't help feeling protective. After all, no one would ever be good enough for my little girl in my eyes. When the doorbell finally rang, my hands trembled slightly. I wiped them on my apron and took a deep breath before answering. Sophia stood there glowing, her long brown hair catching the light. And beside her was Diego, tall, neatly dressed, and wearing a smile that was just a little too confident. "Mom, this is Diego," Sophia said cheerfully, squeezing his hand. "It's such a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Torres," Diego said smoothly. His voice had a faint accent, one that immediately caught my ear. It reminded me of home of my childhood in Mexico before I moved to the US, when I was 12. I recognized the rhythm of his Spanish background, but I kept that detail to myself. I smiled warmly. "Please, call me Elena. Welcome." As the evening went on, I noticed small things about Diego. The way he looked at himself in the reflection of the kitchen window. The way he talked about his career, subtly dropping hints of how successful he was. He was charming, yes, but there was something about his confidence that bordered on arrogance. We sat at the table, and I served my special dish, chicken mole, a recipe passed down from my grandmother. Diego complimented it immediately, though the way he did it felt almost rehearsed. "This is delicious, Elena," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Thank you," I replied, watching him closely. He leaned toward Sophia and said something softly in Spanish. My heart skipped for a moment, and though I wasn't entirely sure I heard correctly, it sounded like, "Tu mamá es un poco anticuada." Your mom is a bit old-fashioned. I froze for a fraction of a second but quickly hid it behind a polite smile. Sophia laughed lightly, probably thinking he said something sweet. I decided to stay quiet. If there was one thing life had taught me, it was that people reveal themselves eventually, if you let them talk long enough. Throughout dinner, he kept making small remarks in Spanish, quick phrases, always under his breath, always with that same smirk. "Al menos cocina bien," he muttered once, meaning, "At least she can cook." Sophia didn't notice. I doubt she even realized he was teasing me. Inside, my blood simmered. Not because of the insults I had dealt with far worse, but because of the disrespect. This was my home, my table, my daughter's future husband. And here he was, mocking me right in front of her, thinking I couldn't understand. I watched him carefully as he spoke, memorizing his words, his tone, his arrogance. Every smile he flashed felt fake, every compliment hollow. He was so sure of himself, so certain that I was just another American mom who knew nothing about where he came from. After dinner, I offered dessert flan, one of Sophia's favorites. Diego declined politely, saying he was full, and instead stepped outside to take a call. I could hear him speaking Spanish again through the cracked window, laughing about how simple the evening was. Sophia, meanwhile, was glowing. "Isn't he great, Mom?" she said, stacking the plates. "He was nervous, but I think he really liked you." I smiled, though inside I felt uneasy. "He seems confident," I said carefully. She giggled. "Yeah, he's just like that. But he's wonderful once you get to know him." I didn't respond. Instead, I watched her as she spoke her innocence, her hope, her blind trust. It reminded me so much of myself at her age, before I learned the hard way that charm can be a mask. When they finally left that night, I stood by the door and watched their car pull away. The house was quiet again, the only sound the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I sat at the table, staring at the empty plates. My heart torn between joy for my daughter and a gnawing instinct that something wasn't right. But during dinner, the way he looked at me changed, and that's when everything started to unravel. At first, I thought I misheard him, but then he smirked, and my blood ran cold. The following weekend, Diego and Sofia came over again. Sofia insisted he wanted to get to know me better. I smiled and agreed, pretending I was just as excited. But deep down, I was curious. I wanted to see whether that smugness I saw before had been my imagination or something darker. That Saturday evening, I made enchiladas verdes, Sofia's favorite. When they arrived, Diego greeted me with a box of chocolates and a polished grin. "For you, Elena," he said. "You have such a lovely home." His tone was sugary sweet, but his eyes gave nothing away. We sat down for dinner, and again, the same pattern began. Diego was polite in English but slipped small comments in Spanish under his breath quick, cutting words that he thought went unnoticed. "Que cena tan modesta," he said quietly at one point. "What a modest dinner." I smiled, pretending not to hear. Sofia giggled at something unrelated, completely unaware. Then, when I asked about his family, Diego answered briefly, but his voice dropped as he whispered in Spanish. "Tu mamá hace demasiadas preguntas." Your mom asks too many questions. Sofia laughed again, thinking he was being playful. I joined in with a gentle chuckle, masking the sting behind it. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of knowing I understood. Each time he spoke, I felt that familiar burn in my chest, the same one I'd felt years ago when people assumed I didn't belong because of my accent, when they smiled to my face but mocked me behind my back. Diego leaned back in his chair, exuding confidence. "You know," he said aloud, "Sofia tells me you're a strong woman. Raising her alone must have been difficult." I nodded. "It had its challenges," I replied calmly. He gave a small laugh. "Well, it seems it turned out fine. Sofia's wonderful." I caught the way he emphasized fine, his eyes flicking toward the modest decor of my dining room. It was subtle, but the message was clear. He thought we were beneath him. Still, I smiled. "Yes, she's my greatest accomplishment," I said proudly. Later, when Sofia went to get dessert, Diego leaned slightly toward me and said softly in Spanish, "Debe haber sido duro sin un hombre en la casa." It must have been hard without a man in the house. I looked him straight in the eye and replied in English, my smile unwavering. "Oh, it was, but we managed just fine." He blinked, clearly uncertain whether I understood. I could see the hesitation in his face. For a moment, I thought he might realize his mistake, but then his confidence returned. He smirked, assuming I was simply guessing his tone. Sofia came back with plates of flan, completely unaware of the silent battle happening across the table. Throughout the night, Diego kept slipping in remarks like tiny knives coated in honey. "She's trying too hard," he muttered once in Spanish. "At least she's not as bad as my ex's mother." I kept my cool. Years of hardship had taught me patience and restraint. I watched how he treated Sofia. He'd touch her hand in a way that seemed affectionate but condescending. He'd correct her casually when she spoke, as if he knew better about everything. The more I observed, the more I saw the cracks in his charm. When the meal ended, Sofia asked if I liked him. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "He seems confident," I said again. Sofia smiled dreamily. "He is. That's one of the things I love about him. He's just so sure of himself." I didn't say what I really thought, that confidence without kindness is arrogance. I didn't want to plant doubt in her mind yet, not without proof. After they left, I sat on the couch and stared at the empty wine glasses. I could still hear his voice echoing in my head, mocking, amused, certain I was clueless. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every moment, every smirk, every whispered word. I kept asking myself if I was overreacting. Maybe he was just nervous, trying to impress. But no, there had been a sharpness in his words, a smug certainty. He wasn't nervous. He was cruel. The next morning, Sophia texted me. "He really likes you, Mom." He said you reminded him of his aunt, strong but funny. I stared at the message for a long time before replying with a simple, "That's nice, honey." I didn't want to spoil her happiness, not yet. But something inside me hardened. I realized that if Diego truly believed I was an ignorant, middle-aged woman who couldn't understand him, then that ignorance would become my advantage. From that day forward, I decided I wouldn't just be polite, I would be observant. I would watch every word, every gesture. He thought he was clever, hiding behind a language he assumed I couldn't understand. But I had spent a lifetime hiding my Spanish for my own reasons. And now, it would be the very thing that protected my daughter. By the end of dinner, I knew this man didn't respect me, and worse, he didn't truly love my daughter. That night, as I washed the dishes, old memories came rushing back. The warm water running over my hands blurred into flashes of my childhood dusty streets in Jalisco, my mother calling me in for dinner, the faint hum of mariachi music drifting through the evening air. It had been so long since I'd spoken Spanish freely, without fear or self-consciousness. Yet hearing Diego toss it around so carelessly that night, using it as a weapon of mockery, stirred something deep inside me that I hadn't felt in years. I was born in Mexico, the youngest of 4 children. My father was a teacher, my mother a nurse, and both worked tirelessly so we could have a better future. When I was 12, my family moved to the United States. I remember clinging to my mother's hand at the airport, terrified and hopeful all at once. We didn't have much, but we had dreams. The early years were hard. I didn't speak a word of English at first, and the other kids at school laughed when I mispronounced things. My mother always said, "Elena, aprende inglés rápido. No dejes que te vean débil. Learn English fast, don't let them see you as weak." And so I did. I practiced every day until my accent faded, until no one could tell I wasn't born here. By high school, I barely spoke Spanish at all. My parents still did. But I answered them in English. It wasn't something I was proud of, but it was survival. I learned that being quiet about where I came from made life easier. People respected me more when they thought I was fully American. That was the unspoken truth I carried for decades. When I married Sophia's father, he was charming, educated, and very good at pretending to understand me. For a while, I thought I had finally found someone who respected me for who I was. But when life got hard, when money grew tight and patience ran thin, he showed his true colors. He began to insult me for my simple ways, comparing me to real American women. The irony was painful. I had spent years erasing parts of myself just to fit that very image. When he left us, I promised myself that no man would ever make me feel small again. Not for my accent, my background, or my womanhood. And most importantly, no one would disrespect my daughter not under my roof. As I wiped down the counter that night, Diego's smug smile flashed in my mind again, his condescending tone, his certainty that I was beneath him. I gripped the sponge tighter, anger swirling in my chest like a storm. He reminded me of every person who had underestimated me, every teacher who assumed I was slow because of my accent, every boss who ignored my ideas until someone else repeated them, every man who thought I should be grateful for their attention. And now, one of those men thought he could marry my daughter. I dried my hands and sat down at the table, staring at the empty plates still scattered across it. Sophia's laughter echoed faintly in my memory light, trusting, full of love. She didn't see what I saw. She couldn't. I understood her blindness. When you love someone, you focus on the good and excuse the bad. You convince yourself that arrogance is confidence, that sarcasm is humor, that disrespect is just misunderstanding. I'd done it myself once too many times. Still, I couldn't just barge into her life and tell her she was making a mistake. She'd think I was being overprotective, or worse, jealous of her happiness. That's how daughters see their mothers, sometimes as obstacles when all we want is to protect them. So I decided to play a longer game. If Diego thought I didn't understand Spanish, I'd let him keep thinking that. I'd let him talk, expose himself word by word, I'd give him enough rope to hang his own arrogance. As I sat there, the quiet of the house wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. The ticking of the clock filled the silence, marking each second of my resolve. I wasn't just a mother anymore, I was a guardian standing at the edge of a storm. The next morning, I called my friend Teresa. She was one of the few people who still spoke to me in Spanish. When I told her what had happened, she whistled. Ay, Elena. Ese tipo suena como un narcisista. Be careful, amiga. I know, I replied softly. But Sofia won't see it yet. Teresa sighed. Then you need proof. You know how love blinds people. Her words stayed with me. Proof. Evidence. Something undeniable. I wasn't sure how yet, but I knew she was right. That afternoon, I watched old home videos of Sofia when she was little. Her laughter, her joy, her innocence, they reminded me why I had to be careful. This wasn't just about pride or being right. This was about keeping her safe from a man who didn't respect her or her family. As the sun set, I looked out the kitchen window and whispered a promise to myself. You'll regret underestimating me, Diego. The irony of it all made me almost smile. For years, I'd hidden my fluency in Spanish out of fear of being judged, of being looked down upon. Now that same secret would be my strength, my weapon. I decided to let him dig his own grave word by word, in a language he thought I didn't understand. A week later, Sofia's engagement party brought everyone together and the tension began. I remember that Saturday afternoon vividly. The sun was warm, the yard was decorated with white and gold balloons, and laughter filled the air. Sofia had worked tirelessly to make everything perfect. She was radiant in her pale blue dress, her smile wide and full of love. Seeing her so happy filled me with pride and worry. I had spent the morning helping her set up tables and string fairy lights across the backyard. She kept humming love songs as she worked, and I couldn't help but smile at her joy. Every time she mentioned Diego's name, her eyes sparkled like she was living in a dream. When he arrived, right on time, he carried a bouquet of roses and a bottle of expensive wine. For my future mother-in-law, he said smoothly, handing them to me. His charm was flawless, his smile confident. But behind his politeness, I sensed that same smugness, a man who believed he was the smartest one in the room. Guests started pouring in. Sofia's friends, my relatives, a few co-workers of Diego's. Everyone seemed to adore him. He laughed easily, told jokes, and charmed his way through the crowd like he'd done this 1,000 times. I stayed mostly near the food table, quietly observing. It's funny how much people reveal when they think no one's paying attention. Diego kept glancing around as if assessing who was worth his time. He had that kind of charm that drew people in but left a sour aftertaste if you watched too closely. At one point, I saw him talking to Camila, one of Sofia's oldest friends. Camila was beautiful, confident, and outgoing. I noticed Diego's eyes lingered on her a little too long. When she laughed, his smile grew wider than it ever had for Sofia. My stomach tightened. Still, I said nothing. I simply watched. Later, as the evening settled in, Sofia asked Diego to help me serve dessert. He agreed, walking over with that same polite grin. This all looks amazing, Elena, he said, motioning to the cakes and pastries. Then, as he turned toward one of his co-workers, he muttered under his breath in Spanish, La mamá es divertida, pero no muy lista. The mom is funny, but not very smart. The words stung, though I kept my face calm. I looked at him briefly and smiled. Thank you, Diego, I said in English. His smirk deepened, convinced I hadn't understood. He moved through the crowd with ease, handing out plates and laughing at his own jokes. Everyone adored him, even my sister, who whispered, Sofia's lucky. He's such a gentleman. I wanted to believe it too. I wanted so badly to be wrong. But deep down, I knew better. As the night went on, Diego kept slipping in and out of conversations with guests, alternating between English and Spanish. When I passed by him later, I overheard him say to one of his friends, Su casa es tan simple, pero al menos tiene buen gusto en comida. Her house is so simple, but at least she has good taste in food. That time, I didn't just hear the words, I memorized them. Every insult, every smug tone, every condescending glance. I pulled out my phone and started recording quietly, just audio, pretending to check messages. I didn't know exactly why I did it, maybe instinct. Maybe it was the mother in me, the protector who'd had enough of watching her child walk blindfolded into danger. When I listened to a bit of it later, my heart sank. He had said worse than I remembered. He mocked my accent, even though I'd barely spoken. He called the decorations childish. He even joked about how he could fix Sophia's taste once they were married. And then I caught something else, something that made my stomach twist. He was talking about Camila again. "She's beautiful, right? Sophia's friend? Such a shame she's taken," he said to his coworker, both of them laughing. I turned off the recording before I could hear more. I didn't need to. I'd already heard enough. When I walked back outside, the fairy lights shimmered softly against the night sky. Sophia was cutting the cake, beaming, surrounded by cheers. Diego stood beside her, holding her hand and smiling proudly. No one saw the truth behind that smile but me. I forced myself to clap, to play along. I couldn't ruin her moment, not yet. This wasn't the time for confrontation. But in that instant, my decision was made. I would gather proof. I would expose him, not out of spite, but to save my daughter from the heartbreak she didn't see coming. As the night ended and guests began to leave, Diego shook my hand again. "Thank you for hosting, Elena," he said. "Everything was perfect." I smiled politely. "You're welcome, Diego. I'm glad you enjoyed it." He winked. "I did every part of it." His arrogance was almost laughable. He walked away, whispering something in Spanish that I couldn't quite catch, but the smirk on his face said enough. I stood at the doorway, watching him lead Sophia to the car, his hand on her waist, his voice low and charming. Sophia turned and waved at me, her smile innocent and bright. But what he said next about my daughter made my blood boil in ways I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about me anymore, it was about what he said about Sophia. After the engagement party, I couldn't shake off what I'd heard. Every time I replayed the recording, my heart clenched tighter. But what haunted me most wasn't the insults about me, it was the tone in his voice when he spoke about my daughter. There was no warmth, no love, not even respect. Just arrogance and mockery. I told myself I might be reading too much into it, that maybe I'd misunderstood his sense of humor. But the truth was right there in those words, in that smug chuckle that had become too familiar. So, the next time Diego and Sophia came over, I decided to keep my phone nearby just in case. That evening, Sophia and Diego sat on the couch while I served coffee. Everything seemed normal at first. They were laughing, holding hands, talking about wedding venues. But the moment Sophia stepped away to answer a call from her maid of honor, Diego leaned back with a smirk, pulling out his phone. He started talking in Spanish to someone, probably one of his friends. At first, his tone was casual, but then I heard him say it words that made my stomach turn. "Sofía es dulce, pero no muy lista." Sophia is sweet, but not very bright. He chuckled softly and added, "A veces me desespera, pero bueno, es bonita, y eso basta." She gets on my nerves sometimes, but hey, she's pretty, and that's enough. I froze in place, my blood turning cold. He wasn't just mocking me anymore, he was belittling her, my daughter, the girl who adored him. I wanted to throw the coffee cup at his face, to scream at him for the disrespect dripping from his words. But instead, I set the tray down quietly, forcing a calm I didn't feel. Sophia came back into the room, smiling, completely unaware of what had just been said. "Who are you talking to?" she asked playfully. Diego locked his phone and smiled. "Just my cousin," he lied easily. "He's asking about the wedding." She laughed and kissed his cheek. "You're always so popular." He grinned, wrapping his arm around her. My stomach twisted. The image of them together, her trusting eyes, his deceitful smirk, was unbearable. When they left that evening, I sat alone in the living room for a long time, my mind spinning. I wanted to protect her, but I knew if I confronted her with only my words, she might think I was overreacting. She was in love deeply, blindly. I had been there once. I knew how impossible it was to see clearly when your heart was involved. So I decided I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. Over the next few weeks, I recorded every conversation I could when Diego came over. I wasn't proud of it, but it felt necessary. I kept my phone nearby, sometimes in my apron pocket, sometimes on the counter while I cooked. Each time I caught more glimpses of his true self. Little insults about Sophia's habits. She's messy. She talks too much. She's naive. He'd laugh at her ideas when she wasn't looking. Roll his eyes when she spoke passionately about her dreams. And tell his friends in Spanish that he'd train her to be the kind of wife he wanted. I began to see patterns, subtle manipulation disguised as affection. Mockery hidden behind smiles. It reminded me too much of my past, of Sophia's father and how he had slowly chipped away at my confidence. I couldn't let that happen to her. One evening while they were visiting, Diego was sitting across the table, scrolling through his phone. I heard the faint buzz of a message notification and caught a glimpse of the screen reflection on the glass cabinet behind him. It was a text thread with Camila. My chest tightened. I couldn't read much, but one line was clear. "Don't tell Sophia. She's too innocent." I excused myself to the kitchen, heart pounding. That was it, the confirmation I dreaded. It wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was betrayal. Later that night, when they finally left, I sat down at the kitchen table and listened to the recordings again. His laughter echoed through the room, sharp and mocking. I scrolled through my notes, reading every word he'd said. My hands shook with anger, but beneath the rage, there was heartbreak. How could someone pretend to love her while saying such things behind her back? How could a man smile at me, eat my food, sit in my home and insult us both like we were nothing? I thought about confronting him right away, but I knew it wasn't time yet. I needed Sophia to see it, to hear it herself. Love can't be argued away, it has to collapse under its own truth. I opened a new folder on my phone and labeled it, "For Sophia." Inside, I stored every recording, every note, every piece of evidence. I didn't know how or when I'd show her, but I knew that day was coming. That night, as I sat in the dark living room, I whispered to myself, "You think you're clever, Diego. You think I'm weak. But you have no idea who you're dealing with." Because this time, I wasn't the naive woman who kept quiet to keep the peace. I was a mother who had spent a lifetime learning how to survive silence, and now I was going to use it to destroy his lies. He thought I was a harmless, naive mother, but I was preparing for his downfall. The mask started to slip, and for the first time, Sophia noticed. Diego came over for dinner that Thursday with a box of pastries and an easy smile that never seemed to reach his eyes. I had made sopa de fideo, something warm and comforting, thinking a simple meal might calm whatever nerves he pretended to have. He greeted me politely, kissed Sophia's cheek, and sat down as if he belonged. As the evening moved along, his attention kept drifting to his phone under the table. He glanced at it more than once, smirked at some private joke, and I felt that familiar prickling at the back of my neck. I decided not to react immediately. Instead, I watched him like a hawk, cataloging every micro-expression, every tiny tone he assumed when he thought no one could hear. Sophia asked him about a work project, and he launched into a long explanation in English, but then he let a phrase slip in Spanish, low and quick. "Demasiadas preguntas," he said, meaning too many questions. Sophia, who had been washing her hands at the sink, didn't hear. I did. I kept stirring the pot and smiled, making my face as neutral as a stone. He thought he was clever, switching languages to keep his sharper edges hidden. He was wrong. Later, while we sat at the small kitchen table drinking coffee, he put his phone face down and tried to engage Sophia in talking about venues. He used that practiced, polished voice, the kind that makes people relax and hand over trust. Mid-sentence, he rolled his eyes at something she said and muttered something under his breath in Spanish that was barely audible. "Ella cree que sabe mucho, pero no tiene idea." She thinks she knows a lot, but she has no idea. His smirk was almost imperceptible, but it cut like glass. Sophia noticed the eye roll and frowned, asking him what he meant, but he waved it away, blaming a thoughtless comment and insisting he'd misspoke. Sophia leaned in, giving him the benefit of the doubt, And in that instant, I saw the way love will always attempt to repair what's broken with hope. After dinner, he walked me to the door and said, "Thank you for tonight. Your home feels so cozy." He said it like a compliment, but in the same breath he made a small, almost affectionate joke to Sophia in Spanish, something about how her mother was adorable for a woman her age. My blood went cold again. Sophia, standing beside him, tilted her head and smiled, not understanding the shade behind his words. I closed the door with a measured calm and didn't speak of it that night. I sat at the kitchen table long after they left, replaying his tone, the cadence, the comfortable cruelty. 2 days later, Sophia came to me in the afternoon, upset but unsure why. "Did you notice Diego being off?" she asked, voice small. "He seemed distracted last night." I could have told her everything then, shown her the recordings, admitted I'd been gathering proof. Part of me wanted to protect her immediate heart from pain, another part wanted her to see the truth at once and run. Instead, I chose strategy. "Maybe he's stressed at work," I suggested softly. "Ask him tomorrow." She nodded, trusting, and left with a kiss on my cheek. Her faith in him rattled me, but it also strengthened my resolve to be precise, not hysterical. I began to collect more tangible evidence. I started leaving my phone in plain sight on the counter but positioned so it recorded discreetly. I read his gestures like pages, and when he thought he was alone in his true voice, he gave me every line I needed. He mocked small things, Sophia's habit of keeping old concert tickets, her homemade art, the way she folded napkins. He called them cute in public and silly to his friends. He joked in Spanish about fixing her after marriage, using a tone that treated her like a project rather than a partner. Each snippet I recorded went into a folder labeled simply "For Sophia." One night, he lost patience during a conversation about family expectations. He snapped at a cousin who interrupted him and then, under his breath, said something I'd been waiting to hear. "No sé cómo alguien puede enamorarse de tanta ingenuidad." I don't know how anyone can fall for so much naivety. The words were poison. That night I did not sleep. I sat up and thought about the little girl Sophia had been, how she used to press flowers in books, how she'd read aloud to me until she fell asleep. I thought about how someone who called that innocence a flaw had no place promising forever. I knew then that subtlety had its limits. Sophia had started to notice, and I had enough pieces to begin weaving a story she couldn't dismiss as jealousy. I wasn't going to ambush her with fury. I'd lay out the evidence, let the truth form its own shape, and give her the space to see what love hadn't let her see. And fate handed me the perfect opportunity sooner than I expected. When Diego invited me to dinner with his parents, I didn't know it would turn into a battlefield. The invitation came out of nowhere. Sophia called one afternoon, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, Diego's parents want to meet you." "Isn't that great?" she said. "They've invited us to dinner next Saturday at a nice restaurant downtown." I hesitated. After everything I had learned, sitting across from the people who raised him felt like stepping into enemy territory. But if Diego wanted me there, it meant he still believed I was oblivious and that ignorance was my greatest weapon. Saturday came faster than I expected. I dressed neatly but modestly, a simple black dress, gold earrings, and a small pendant Sophia had given me years ago. When I arrived, Diego was already there with Sophia and his parents. His mother, Lucia, was elegant, the kind of woman whose confidence filled the room before she spoke. His father, Javier, was quiet, observing everyone with careful eyes. "Elena," Lucia greeted warmly, kissing both my cheeks. "We've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I said with a small smile. "Of course." She laughed lightly, her tone smooth as silk. Diego pulled out a chair for me, his smile perfectly polished. "I'm glad you could join us, Elena," he said. "I know family means a lot to you." I met his gaze, holding it for a second longer than polite. "Yes," I replied. "It means everything." At first, the dinner was pleasant enough. We talked about Sophia and Diego's engagement, the wedding plans, the venue they were considering. Diego's parents were charming and seemed genuinely happy. But as the meal went on, I began to notice the subtle shift in Diego's behavior, that same arrogance creeping back into his tone, especially when the conversation switched to Spanish. He assumed, as always, that I was just nodding politely without understanding. When the waiter came to take our orders, Diego said in Spanish, "Espero que sepa leer el menú." I hope she knows how to read the menu. His mother chuckled softly as though it were a harmless joke. I smiled, pretending not to notice, and ordered in English. As the waiter left, Lucia leaned toward her son. "Diego, don't tease," she said gently, though she was still smiling. "Elena's very kind," he smirked. "Sí es amable. Solo un poco simple." Yes, she's kind. Just a little simple. The words hit like a slap, but I refused to flinch. I lifted my glass of water, took a slow sip and looked at him. "How's work been, Diego?" I asked sweetly in English. He blinked, momentarily thrown off, and muttered something about a promotion. I could tell his parents didn't fully approve of his tone either. Javier stayed quiet most of the time, his eyes darting between his son and me. He looked as though he wanted to speak up but held his tongue. When the waiter returned with the meals, Diego made another comment in Spanish, quietly enough that Sofia wouldn't hear. "Qué típico, pidió algo barato." How typical, she ordered something cheap. This time, I met his eyes, and I smiled slowly. "The food here smells wonderful, doesn't it?" I said, my voice calm and even. "I can't wait to try it." He smiled back, smug, still convinced his secret language protected him, but halfway through dinner, I decided the time for silence had ended. When the waiter returned to ask if we needed anything else, I turned to him and said, in perfect Spanish, "Sí, por favor. ¿Podría traer otra jarra de agua con limón? Y también un poco más de pan. Si no es molestia." Yes, please, could you bring another pitcher of water with lemon? And also a bit more bread, if it's not too much trouble. The table went silent. Diego froze, his fork hovering mid-air. His parents exchanged quick glances, their surprise was unmistakable. Lucia broke the silence first. "You speak Spanish, Elena?" she asked, smiling awkwardly. I smiled back. Fluently. "It's my first language, actually." The color drained from Diego's face. I could see his jaw tighten, his perfect posture collapsing into discomfort. "Oh," he managed to say. "I didn't realize." I leaned slightly forward, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "I suppose it never came up. I like to listen more than I speak." Lucia laughed nervously, trying to recover the mood. "That's wonderful. You and I can speak Spanish together then." "Of course," I replied, my eyes never leaving Diego's. He didn't say another word in Spanish for the rest of the meal. He stuck strictly to English, stumbling over small talk, clearly rattled. His parents tried to keep the conversation going, but the tension was palpable. Even Sofia noticed something was off. "Is everything okay?" she asked, looking between us. "Perfectly fine," I said, cutting another piece of my steak with deliberate calm. "I think we're all just learning new things about each other." Diego forced a smile, but his hands betrayed him. They fidgeted under the table, restless and nervous. When dinner finally ended, he rushed to pay the bill and usher everyone out, pretending everything was normal. As we stood by the restaurant's entrance, Lucia hugged me and said warmly, "You're a remarkable woman, Elena. I hope we get to know you better." "Thank you," I said. "I'd like that." Diego's smile was thin and brittle as glass. On the drive home, he barely spoke. Sofia, still glowing from the evening, talked about how kind his parents were. She didn't see the storm brewing beside her. I watched their car disappear down the road, my reflection faintly visible in the restaurant window. For the first time, Diego had tasted what it felt like to be exposed, to realize that his cruelty hadn't been secret after all. But instead of confronting him then, I decided to let the tension simmer until the truth exploded on its own. After that dinner, Diego couldn't hide his discomfort around me. The man who once filled every room with confidence now seemed uneasy whenever I was near. He still wore the same polished smile, but there was tension behind it, a flicker of fear he tried desperately to disguise. The power dynamic had shifted, and he knew it. Sophia didn't notice right away, but I did. He was quieter when he came over, careful with his words, and now, whenever I spoke, his eyes darted to me like he was waiting for me to slip into Spanish again. I didn't, not at first. I wanted him to stew in that uncertainty, to wonder just how much I'd understood, how many of his insults I'd already heard. One evening, they came for dinner again. Sophia was cheerful, chattering about work and wedding plans, while Diego picked at his food. He tried to act engaged, but his mind was elsewhere. When I asked him simple questions about his parents, the kind of polite conversation any mother might make, he answered with short, clipped phrases. Sophia frowned. Diego, are you okay? You've been quiet lately. He forced a laugh. Just tired. Cariño. Long week at work. But it wasn't work. It was guilt. I could see it in his eyes. Later, when Sophia stepped out to take a phone call, he finally looked at me. His smile vanished. You could have told me you spoke Spanish, he said quietly, his tone sharp. I met his gaze calmly. I could have, I replied. But you never asked, he scoffed. You think you're clever, don't you? No, I said, still composed. Just observant. He stared at me for a long second before forcing that fake grin back onto his face. Well, I suppose that's one way to play it. Sophia came back into the room, and immediately, his demeanor changed cheerful again, affectionate, pretending nothing had happened. But I saw the flicker of resentment in his eyes. The polite mask he'd worn so effortlessly before was beginning to crack. Over the next few days, I started noticing things that confirmed what I had suspected from the beginning. Diego was a master manipulator, but only when he was in control. Without it, he floundered. He started showing up late to family events, giving vague excuses. When he did come, he made passive-aggressive remarks about how some people like to meddle in other people's relationships. He said it with a grin, but the venom underneath was clear. At one family brunch, my sister asked him about the wedding date, and he smirked. We haven't decided yet. Sophia's mom has strong opinions about everything, so we'll see what she thinks first. Sophia laughed it off, but her expression faltered just a bit. She noticed it not consciously, but enough to feel something wasn't right. The seeds of doubt were beginning to take root. Then came the small arguments. I'd see them bicker quietly when they thought I wasn't paying attention. He'd correct her mid-sentence, roll his eyes when she forgot something, and once, I even heard him whisper, "You're being dramatic, Sophia." It wasn't loud, but the tone, the cold authority made my stomach twist. Sophia was trying to hold everything together, convincing herself that the tension was just stress. I wanted to reach out, to show her the proof I had collected, but I still needed her to see the truth with her own eyes, not through mine. That moment came one evening when we all went out to dinner at a small Italian restaurant. Sophia excused herself to the restroom, leaving Diego and me alone at the table. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You don't like me, do you, Elena? I smiled faintly. I like anyone who treats my daughter well. His jaw tightened. You've been trying to turn her against me. I don't need to, I said softly. You're doing that yourself. He glared, then chuckled under his breath. You think you can scare me? I tilted my head slightly. No, Diego. I think you scare yourself. He said nothing. Instead, he finished his drink in silence, his hands trembling slightly around the glass. When Sophia returned, he plastered on that same grin again, his voice suddenly warm and affectionate. But I could tell she noticed his shift in mood. She asked him what was wrong, and he brushed it off, saying he was tired again. That night, as they left, Sophia gave me a small look not of suspicion but confusion. I could tell she was starting to feel the weight of what I'd known all along. Over the next week, she called me more often, asking little questions about relationships and trust. Mom, she said one evening over the phone, do you think people can change? I paused. Yes, I answered truthfully. But only if they want to. And only if they have respect. There was a silence on the line. Then, softly, she said, Diego's been different lately. I closed my eyes. Pay attention to that, Sophia. Love should make you feel safe, not small. When the call ended, I sat in silence, realizing that she was beginning to see it, piece by piece. I hadn't needed to expose him publicly yet. His own actions were doing that for me. But I knew the day was coming when everything would shatter, and the truth would no longer be something we could keep hidden. And that day came sooner than I expected, at a family barbecue that went horribly wrong. What started as a fun afternoon turned into a nightmare. My brother Daniel loved hosting family barbecues. Every summer, he'd invite the whole family for good food, loud music, and laughter that could be heard halfway down the street. When he told me he wanted to celebrate Sophia's engagement with a special family cookout, I hesitated at first. But then I realized it could be exactly what I needed, a setting where Diego's charm would finally meet people who weren't as easily impressed as Sophia. Sophia was thrilled. She spent days helping Daniel plan the menu, making sure everything looked perfect. Diego seemed less enthusiastic, but he played along, pretending to be excited. "Of course, I love family gatherings," he said. His tone was casual, but I could sense the impatience underneath. The day of the barbecue was bright and warm, the air thick with the scent of grilled meat and the laughter of children running through sprinklers. Everyone was in high spirits, my cousins chatting over drinks, my nieces setting the table, and my brother standing proudly behind the grill. Diego arrived with Sophia, perfectly dressed as always, a crisp white shirt and expensive sunglasses. He shook hands, smiled at everyone, and even brought a bottle of wine, the kind of small gesture that made him seem considerate. To everyone else, he looked like the perfect fiancé. But I knew better. At first, everything went smoothly. Diego laughed at my brother's jokes, complimented the food, and chatted in Spanish with my cousin's husband, Mateo. I stayed back, letting him think he'd regained control. It was near sunset when things began to unravel. I was at the food table refilling drinks when my niece Carla, who was 16 and fluent in Spanish, tugged on my sleeve. "Tia Elena," she whispered, her eyes wide. "You should hear what Diego's saying." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "He's talking to Mateo. He's making fun of you and of Mom." In Spanish. I felt the air leave my lungs. "What exactly did he say?" Carla looked uncomfortable. "He said you act like you're sophisticated but that you're just a small-town woman who got lucky." He laughed and said Sophia inherited your mediocre taste. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd endured enough insults from him before, but hearing that he was saying those things in my brother's home, surrounded by family, was too much. I looked toward the patio. There he was, standing with Mateo, holding a drink, smirking as he spoke rapidly in Spanish. Mateo looked uneasy but didn't respond. Diego's laughter was light, confident, careless. That was the moment I decided I'd had enough. I walked back inside, grabbed my phone from my purse, and opened the folder I had been building for weeks, for Sophia. Dozens of recordings. Each one with his voice mocking, belittling, laughing. I knew what I had to do. When I returned outside, I called for everyone's attention. The music faded as Daniel turned down the volume. "Everyone," I said loudly, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I'd like to make a toast," Sophia beamed, assuming it was something sentimental. Diego looked momentarily nervous but quickly recovered his composure, lifting his glass. I smiled, locking eyes with him. "Before I say anything," I said, "I want everyone to hear something special." I pressed play on my phone. Diego's voice filled the air, crystal clear, unmistakable. "Tu mamá es un poco anticuada." Your mom is a bit old-fashioned. A few gasps broke through the crowd. I let it play further. "Sofía es dulce, pero no muy lista." Sophia is sweet, but not very bright. Sophia's smile vanished instantly. The guests fell silent, staring at Diego in disbelief. His face turned pale, and he stammered, "That's not I didn't, I turned up the volume." The next clip was from the engagement party, where he had mocked my house, my food, my daughter, all in the same condescending tone. Sophia covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and heartbreak. The recording ended with his laughter echoing through the speakers, cold, cruel, and self-satisfied. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every pair of eyes was on him. He tried to recover, fumbling for excuses. "This is taken out of context," he said, forcing a laugh. "It's just jokes, nothing serious." "Jokes?" I repeated softly, stepping forward. "You mocked your fiancé and her family, called her simple, called me ignorant, and laughed behind our backs. Do you call that a joke?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Sophia looked at him like she didn't recognize him. "You said those things about me?" she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Baby, you have to understand I was—" "Stop," she said sharply. "Don't you dare call me that." The crowd stayed silent. Everyone watching this man once charming, now exposed. His mask had finally shattered. I could see the anger flicker behind his eyes, but he couldn't lash out here. Not in front of witnesses. He tried to walk away, muttering curses in Spanish under his breath. My brother stepped forward, blocking his path. "You should leave," Daniel said firmly. "Now." Diego's jaw clenched, but he nodded and walked toward his car, his pride in pieces. Sophia stood motionless, her face pale and her eyes hollow. When his car pulled away, she finally broke down, collapsing into my arms. I held her tightly as she sobbed. The rest of the family stood in stunned silence, unsure what to say. I stroked her hair gently, whispering, "It's over, mija. You don't need to say anything. You've seen who he really is." She cried until her shoulders shook, and I could feel years of my own anger melting into sorrow. I wished I hadn't been right. I wished I could have protected her from the pain of this truth. And the look on Sophia's face when she realized the truth will haunt me forever. Diego's lies finally caught up to him, and there was no escaping this time. The morning after the barbecue, the house was painfully quiet. Sophia hadn't come out of her room since the night before. I could hear her muffled sobs through the door, each one cutting through me like glass. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would all be okay, but I also knew she needed space. Sometimes heartbreak needs silence more than sympathy. Around noon, she finally emerged, her eyes red and swollen. She sat down at the kitchen table without saying a word. I poured her a cup of coffee and sat across from her. After a long pause, she whispered, "Mom, did you know?" I looked down at my hands. "I did." Her chin trembled. "For how long?" "For a while," I admitted softly. "I wanted to tell you, but I needed you to see it for yourself. If I had told you earlier, you might have thought I was exaggerating, or worse, that I didn't want you to be happy." She stared at me for a long time before nodding slowly. "You're right," she said. "I would have defended him. I can't believe I didn't see it." I reached across the table and held her hand. "Love makes us see people as we want them to be, not as they are. That's not your fault." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He made me feel like I wasn't enough sometimes, like I had to prove myself. I thought it was me." "It was never you, Sophia," I said firmly. "He wanted control, not love. There's a difference." Just then, her phone buzzed on the table. We both looked at it. Diego's name flashing across the screen. Sophia stared at it for a moment before answering. His voice came through loud and fast, filled with panic. "Sophia, please, you have to let me explain. Your mom set me up." That recording was out of context, I swear. I could hear the desperation in his tone. Sophia held the phone tightly, her voice trembling but steady. "You called me dumb, Diego. You called my mother names in her own home. How is that out of context?" "That's not what I meant," he insisted. "I was just joking. You know how I am, I didn't mean anything by it." "You meant every word," she said quietly. "I heard your voice. I saw your face. You weren't joking." He stammered, then shifted to anger. "So this is it? You're going to throw everything away because of one stupid mistake?" Sophia took a deep breath. "It wasn't one mistake, Diego. It was a pattern, and I finally see it." Before he could respond, she hung up. Then she placed the phone down gently, as if it suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. I felt tears prick my own eyes, watching her not as my little girl, but as a woman finding her strength through pain. Later that afternoon, Diego showed up unannounced. I was in the yard watering the plants when I saw his car pull into the driveway. My chest tightened, but I stood my ground. He got out, looking disheveled and frantic. "Elena, please," he said, raising his hands as if I might attack him. "I need to talk to Sophia. I love her." "Love?" I repeated quietly. "You don't mock the people you love, Diego." He stepped closer. "You don't understand." I was nervous. I didn't mean half the things I said. "I understand perfectly." I cut in. "You thought I was beneath you. You thought my daughter was something you could shape. You underestimated both of us." He looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could, Sophia appeared in the doorway. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were cold. "You should leave, Diego." He turned to her, his expression softening. "Sophia, please, don't do this, you're making a mistake." She shook her head. "No, you did." He took a step toward her. "I can change, I'll prove it." "You can't fix what you don't even admit is broken," she said firmly. For a moment he just stood there, his eyes darting between us, his confidence evaporating. Then he sighed heavily and muttered, "Fine, if that's what you want." He walked back to his car, slamming the door harder than necessary, and drove off. The sound of his tires screeching down the street echoed long after he was gone. Sophia stood still for a moment, then broke down, collapsing into my arms. I held her tightly, whispering, "It's over now, mija. It's really over." That night, we sat on the couch together, watching the sun set through the window. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There was no need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful, cleansing. Sophia eventually said softly, "I feel stupid." I shook my head. "You're not stupid. You loved someone who pretended to be good. That says nothing bad about you. It says everything about him." She smiled weakly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown me the truth." "You would have seen it eventually," I said gently. "Because the truth always finds a way out." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, I felt her truly relax. The storm had passed, but a small part of me still sensed it wasn't over completely. I had seen the look in Diego's eyes before he left, the mix of shame and anger that doesn't simply disappear. But even then, Diego hadn't learned his lesson, not until he tried to get revenge. I thought I'd seen the last of him, but he wasn't done with us yet. For a few blessed weeks, life started to feel normal again. Sophia was quiet but healing. She threw herself into work, spent more time with her friends, and even started volunteering at the local library. I could see the pain slowly leaving her eyes, replaced by the faint light of resilience. But every now and then, I'd catch her glancing at her phone as though expecting something, a text, an apology, maybe closure that hadn't arrived. That closure never came. Instead, the peace we'd built began to crack the moment Diego decided he wasn't finished. It started subtly. Sophia received an email from an unknown address. It read, "You think you're better than me now? You'll see what happens when you humiliate a man in front of everyone." No name, but we both knew who it was from. Sophia looked terrified. "Mom, do you think it's him?" she asked, holding her phone like it was something poisonous. I didn't need to look twice. "Yes," I said simply. "Block the sender." She did. But that didn't stop him. A few days later, she started getting strange messages on social media, fake accounts posting comments under her pictures. "Ungrateful. You'll regret it. People should know what you did." The language was familiar, the tone unmistakable. I reported every account, blocked every name, but the harassment kept resurfacing in new forms. Diego wasn't threatening violence, he was trying to taint her peace, to make her look over her shoulder, to keep himself alive in her mind. Then, one night, he texted me directly. The message was short and chilling. "You think you've won, Señora? I never lose." I stared at the words for a long moment before setting the phone down. Fear tried to creep in, but I refused to let it. I had faced far worse in my life than a coward hiding behind a screen. The next morning, I called my brother Daniel and told him everything. He immediately offered to go to the police. "You should file a report," he said. At least make sure there's a record. And we did. The officer who took the report was kind but practical. Keep documenting everything, he advised. Don't engage, don't respond, just save every message. He'll hang himself with his own words if he keeps this up. I followed that advice to the letter. For a while, the messages stopped. It was quiet again, eerily quiet. Sophia even started to laugh again, the first genuine laughter I'd heard from her in months. We thought maybe, finally, he had moved on. But a man like Diego doesn't let go of control that easily. A few weeks later, one of Sophia's co-workers showed her a post on social media. It was a long rant written under a fake name, but the story was unmistakably about her. It painted her as a manipulative girlfriend who'd ruined a man's life. He described her as cruel and vindictive, twisting the truth to make himself the victim. Sophia's hands shook as she read it. He's trying to make people pity him, she whispered. He wants everyone to think I was the bad one. I took her phone gently from her hands. That's exactly what bullies do when they lose power. They rewrite the story. We reported the post and blocked the account, but the damage had been done. Friends started asking questions, curious whispers spread. Sophia began to isolate herself again, not wanting to explain or relive the humiliation. Then came the final message, the one that chilled me to my core. It arrived late one night, from another unknown number. You'll regret humiliating me. Both of you will. That was no longer petty anger, it was a threat. I immediately called the police again. And this time, they took it seriously. I handed over every message, every recording, every piece of evidence. Within a week, we were granted a restraining order. Sophia cried when she held the paper in her hands. I never thought it would come to this, she said quietly. Neither did I admitted. But it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. You're standing up for yourself. For a few days after that, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me tense. But I kept reminding myself that fear was exactly what Diego wanted and I refused to give it to him. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. No more messages, no more posts, no phone calls. It was as if he had vanished. Sophia and I decided we needed to get away for a while to breathe somewhere far from the memories of him. We booked a weekend trip to a small coastal town a few hours away, hoping that the ocean air could wash away the residue of his cruelty. The morning we left, I locked the front door and stood for a moment, taking in the quiet of the house. He's gone, I told myself. It's over. But deep down, a small voice whispered that some people don't disappear so easily, especially those who believe the world owes them revenge. It sent a chill down my spine. But I refused to be intimidated. We decided to take a short trip to clear our minds and heal. But even on that trip, fate had one last twist waiting for us. I never expected to see him again, but life has a cruel sense of humor. Our weekend getaway was supposed to be peaceful. Sophia and I drove to a small coastal town 3 hours away, a quiet place with white sand, wooden boardwalks, and ocean breezes that smelled like salt and healing. We rented a small room at a family-run inn near the beach. For the first time in months, we could breathe. The first day felt almost magical. We spent the afternoon walking barefoot along the shore, collecting shells, letting the waves wash over our feet. Sophia laughed, really laughed, and it felt like I had my daughter back. The heaviness that had clung to her since Diego's betrayal seemed to lift with every tide. That night, we had dinner at a seaside restaurant overlooking the ocean. I watched her sip her drink, her eyes soft under the dim glow of the string lights. You look happy, I said, smiling. She nodded. I am, Mom. I finally feel free. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's all I ever wanted for you. The next morning, we decided to take a walk through the town before breakfast. The streets were quiet, lined with little cafes and shops selling handmade jewelry and beach art. We stopped at a cafe that looked cozy, small tables, soft music, and the smell of coffee and fresh bread wafting through the air. We ordered 2 cappuccinos and sat by the window, watching people pass by. Everything felt calm until Sophia suddenly went still. Her eyes widened slightly as she stared toward the counter. Mom, she whispered. Don't look right away. But I think that's Diego. My stomach dropped. I turned my head slowly, trying not to draw attention. And there he was. Diego. He looked different. Thinner. Tired. His perfect posture gone. He was wearing a faded apron and taking orders from a family at the counter. The confident man who once strutted into every room like he owned it now looked like a shadow of himself. Sophia froze, gripping her cup tightly. "What do we do?" she asked in a trembling voice. I placed my hand over hers. "Nothing," I said calmly. "We sit. We finish our coffee." Her eyes flicked between me and him, disbelief clouding her face. "Mom, what if he sees us?" "Then he sees us," I replied. "We have nothing to hide." As if on cue, he turned. His eyes scanned the room and then landed on us. For a moment, he didn't move. I saw the exact second he realized who we were. His face drained of color. His lips parting slightly. He hesitated, then walked toward our table, slowly, cautiously, like a man approaching a wound he'd inflicted himself. "Elena," he said first, his voice soft, almost unrecognizable. "Sophia." Sophia tensed, but I didn't move. "Hello, Diego," I said evenly. He stood there awkwardly, shifting his weight. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I work here now." "So I see," I replied. There was a pause, long, uncomfortable, heavy with everything left unsaid. He looked at Sophia, his eyes glistening. "You look good," he said softly. Sophia didn't answer. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I owe you both an apology," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "For everything. For what I said. For how I treated you. I was stupid. I thought mocking people made me stronger. It didn't. It made me pathetic." Sophia blinked, taken aback by his tone. "Diego, you hurt me," she said, her voice trembling. "You made me feel small. You made me doubt myself." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I hate myself for it." I watched him closely, searching for even a trace of the arrogance that used to define him. It wasn't there. He looked beaten down, humbled by life in a way I hadn't thought possible. He swallowed hard and looked at me. "Elena, I disrespected you, a woman who did nothing but show me kindness. I thought I was being clever, but I was being cruel. I'm sorry." For a long time, I didn't speak. I could feel Sophia's eyes on me, waiting to see what I would do. Finally, I said, "You can't undo what you did, Diego. But it takes courage to face the people you've wronged. I accept your apology for both of us." Sophia turned to me, surprised. But I saw the relief in her eyes too. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was closure. Diego nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." He took a step back. "I'll leave you to your coffee." He started to walk away. But before he did, he turned once more. "For what it's worth," he said, "you both deserved better than me, and I hope you find it." When he disappeared behind the counter, Sophia exhaled shakily. "Mom, I didn't expect that." "Neither did I admitted. But sometimes life gives people the lessons they refuse to learn the easy way." We sat there in silence for a while, staring out at the ocean beyond the window. I watched the waves crash against the shore, each one erasing footprints left behind in the sand. "Do you believe he's changed?" Sophia asked softly. I thought for a moment. "I believe he's learning," I said. "And sometimes, that's the most we can hope for." She nodded, then reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't hate him anymore," she said quietly. "I just feel sorry for him." I squeezed her hand. "That means you've healed, mija." Outside, the sky was streaked with pink and gold, the world washed clean by forgiveness neither of us expected to give. And in that moment, I realized revenge wasn't about destroying him, it was about reclaiming our peace. For the first time in months, I finally felt peace. That night, after we saw Diego at the cafe, Sophia and I took a long walk along the beach. The sky was painted with fading gold, the waves soft and rhythmic, the kind of calm that speaks louder than words ever could. We didn't talk for the first few minutes. There was no need to. The sound of the ocean did the talking for us. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "I can't believe how different he looked," she said softly. "He used to walk into every room like he owned it. Now he looked small." I nodded slowly. Life has a way of humbling people who think they're untouchable. She sighed, kicking at the sand. "Part of me still feels angry. Not because I miss him, I don't, but because he made me question myself. I keep thinking about all the times I stayed quiet just to avoid upsetting him." I looked at her, my heart tightening with both sadness and pride. "You were kind, Sophia. That's never a weakness. But now you know better. You know what real love should feel like." She smiled faintly. "Safe," she said, as if finishing my sentence. "Love should make you feel safe." We sat on a driftwood log and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, salty, and full of promise. I realized in that moment that this trip wasn't just for her, it was for me, too. I had carried so much anger for so long. Anger at Diego, at my past, at the world that once made me hide who I was. But sitting there beside my daughter, I felt it all begin to fade, like the tide washing away footprints in the sand. When we returned home a few days later, everything felt lighter. Sophia smiled more, slept better, and filled the house with laughter again. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that sound. It was the sound of healing. We decided to delete the recordings together. It was Sophia's idea. "I don't want to keep them," she said. "They served their purpose. I don't want his voice living on my phone anymore." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You're right." We sat on the couch, opened the folder labeled "For Sophia," and watched one by one as the files disappeared. Every deleted clip felt like closing a wound. When it was done, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "It's over." The next morning, she told me she had made a decision. "I'm going back to school," she said. "I want to finish my master's. I've been putting it off for too long." I smiled so hard it made my cheeks ache. "That's wonderful, Sophia. You're finally choosing yourself." "I think I forgot how to for a while," she admitted. "I kept thinking life was supposed to be about finding someone to complete me. But I don't need that right now. I just want to complete me." Those words made my heart swell with pride. She was growing stronger, wiser, and more confident every day. Watching her rebuild herself reminded me of when I had to do the same after her father left. The parallels were painful but powerful, a cycle of women learning to rise from heartbreak. As for me, I found a new purpose. I started volunteering at a local women's center. Every Thursday evening, I met with women who had survived emotional abuse, manipulation, or neglect. I shared my story, not all the painful details, but enough to let them know they weren't alone. I taught them how to recognize red flags, how to listen to their intuition, how to stop mistaking arrogance for confidence. It felt like everything I'd gone through, all the humiliation, all the anger had led me there, to help others find their voice before they lost it. Sophia supported me every step of the way. She'd even come to a few sessions, quietly listening, occasionally offering words of encouragement to younger women who reminded her of herself. Seeing her use her pain to empower others made me realize just how far she'd come. Life wasn't perfect, it never is, but it was honest, and that was enough. Months passed, and Diego became nothing more than a fading memory. We didn't talk about him anymore, and there was no bitterness left. Every trace of his shadow had been replaced by light, the kind that only forgiveness and self-respect can bring. Then, one evening, just as I thought that chapter had fully closed, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there was an older woman with gentle eyes and a soft voice that trembled. As she spoke, "Are you Elena Torres?" she asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. She nodded, her eyes misting. "I'm Lucia Diego's mother." Sophia, hearing the voice, appeared behind me, startled. "Mrs. Morales?" she said quietly. Lucia smiled sadly. "I hope I'm not intruding. I needed to see you both. She held a small envelope in her hand. The air around us felt heavy, the kind of silence that carried both pain and relief. But just when I thought the past was behind us, Diego's mother showed up at my door. When I opened the door and saw his mother standing there, I didn't know what to expect. Lucia looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was that the weight of sorrow had settled over her shoulders. Her eyes were tired, her smile faint but genuine. She held an envelope in her hands as though it were something fragile, something she had carried a long distance, both in miles and in emotion. "Can we come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside. Of course. Sophia and I led her to the living room. I could see the tension in my daughter's posture, the old memories flickering in her eyes. Lucia sat down on the couch, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the envelope on the coffee table. "I didn't come to defend my son," she began quietly. "I came to make things right, as much as I can." Sophia and I exchanged a glance, both uncertain but listening. Lucia took a deep breath. "Diego left the country 2 months ago," she said. "He's living in Spain now. He wanted a fresh start, and before he left, he gave me this." She pushed the envelope toward us. "It's a letter for both of you." Sophia hesitated before picking it up. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it and began to read. Diego's handwriting was neat, careful, almost unrecognizable from the careless arrogance we'd once known. "Sophia, Elena, if you're reading this, I know I've lost the right to ask for your forgiveness. But I need to say this anyway. What I did to you both was cruel. I mocked what I didn't understand and disrespected what I should have cherished. I thought intelligence meant superiority, and confidence meant control. I was wrong. I see that now." Sophia's voice wavered as she read aloud, her eyes glistening. "After everything that happened, I had to face who I was. I lost my job, my friends, my reputation. I blamed everyone else at first, but eventually, I realized it was me. Every downfall, every ruined relationship, all my doing. I used to laugh at humility. Now I'm learning to live it." Lucia was quiet, her hands folded tightly in her lap as Sophia continued reading. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I've changed not because I want your approval, but because I couldn't live with who I was. You were both right about me. I hurt the only person who ever truly loved me, and I disrespected a woman who showed me more grace than I deserved. If there's any justice in the world, it's that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man I should have been when I met you." When Sophia finished, she lowered the letter and wiped her eyes. The room was filled with silence, the kind that feels both heavy and freeing. Lucia spoke softly. "He asked me to deliver it in person. He said it was the least he could do." I looked at her, seeing in her face the exhaustion only a mother could know, the pain of loving a child who's made unforgivable mistakes. "Thank you for bringing it," I said gently. "That takes courage." Lucia nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I raised him better than that, Elena. I can't tell you how much shame I've carried. But I'm grateful you exposed him when you did. You made him see himself. No one else ever managed that." Her voice broke. And for a moment, she looked so fragile that I couldn't help but reach over and take her hand. "You don't owe me an apology," I said. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them, and it sounds like he finally did." Sophia looked at her too, her expression soft. "I don't hate him anymore," she said quietly. "I don't think I ever really did. I just wanted him to understand what he took from me." Lucia smiled sadly. "He does now." After a long pause, I asked, "Would you like some tea?" She nodded gratefully. While I boiled water in the kitchen, I heard Sophia and Lucia talking in low voices, gentle, hesitant, but kind. When I returned, they were both smiling faintly, the air between them lighter. We sat together for almost an hour, sharing stories, laughter, even a few tears. By the time Lucia stood to leave, the weight that had been hanging over us all these months had finally begun to lift. As she stood by the door, she turned to me and said softly, "You're a good mother, Elena. Strong. I hope my son learned that strength isn't about control, it's about grace." I smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you, Lucia." And I hope he finds peace. We all deserve that, in the end. After she left, Sophia and I sat back on the couch, the letter still resting on the table between us. What should we do with it? She asked. I thought for a moment. Keep it? She shook her head gently. No. I think it's time to let it go. I nodded in agreement. We went outside to the backyard, where the evening sun painted everything in shades of gold and orange. Sophia held the letter in her hands one last time before setting it in a small metal dish. I struck a match and handed it to her. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges of the paper until it turned to glowing ash. We stood side by side, watching it burn not out of anger, but acceptance. When it was done, I whispered, "Goodbye, Diego." Sophia looked at me and smiled faintly. Goodbye. The breeze carried the ashes upward, scattering them into the air until they disappeared completely. It felt symbolic, the final trace of pain drifting away, making room for something new. We went back inside, the quiet no longer heavy, but peaceful. Sophia poured 2 cups of tea, and we sat at the table together, watching the light fade. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Not victorious, not vindicated, just free. And as I watched the ashes drift away, I realized that understanding, not revenge, had been my greatest power all along.